We're the two Pilates Chicks here in our studio in Los Angeles, and it is season 6, episode 7. What's the title?
Adaptive Language in Pilates.
Yay! And we're going to apologize right now. Our brains are struggling.
Yeah,
today.
who knows?
We don't know what's going to happen, but we've got our notes. We want to discuss this. It's kind of come up a lot in different podcasts with cueing, and I love our quote, cueing is a conversation.
Yeah, it all just kind of comes back to that quote, cueing is a conversation, and the quote combined with it that you should just always teach the body in front of you.
Yes, which is easy to say, but are you really doing it?
Right.
Because are we using the same cues for every client, for every exercise? Or are you, as we're going to discuss, adapting that language in your cueing for that client in that moment?
To what's needed.
Mm-hmm. And here's where the brains went. And we're done.
And done.
So I guess we could start with kind of, to take it off, is that we kind of talked about, well, we haven't, but we were discussing kind of that male-female client, because that's a broad, general kind of distinction. And then we can get into the nitty-grittier of
other little ones.
The little ones.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say there's no difference in teaching male and female clients. And while that can be true for some people, there just are some differences. And some of them being that we tend to notice if we tell a male client to point their feet, they tend not to understand what that is. And one of the common cues that I remember being taught and that a lot of group classes will use is put on your high heels. Mm-hmm. Like if we're saying...
And the guy's going to be like, nope.
What? Or Barbie feet. That's another one. And that can be very like alienating for some male clients. Some might not care. And some
might get it and understand.
But that can be very much like disconnecting for a number of clients. So for those clients, it's like you have to figure out, like, okay, if I'm telling this person, like, let's say you're on toes on the foot bar and you're doing footwork, and I'm saying to this person, I want you to get your heels lifted. I'm trying to get them to lengthen out of their ankles while they're pushing the foot bar. But if you say, okay, put on your high heels, for some women, that might not even make sense.
It might not. Or they might overcorrect,
yeah.
Like, what is that? Well, I don't know what the highest heel you could do.
I was thinking like stilettos.
Yeah, what is that, like 10 inches?
I don't know.
No, we don't wear stilettos. But yeah, they can just like go into this extreme and you're like, oh yeah, not that high.
Overpassing.
Like, yeah. But yeah, it's like you kind of have to figure, it's like I had a male client. It was my first male client, I remember. And I had, I was in a studio that used a lot of imagery, which I'm kind of not comfortable with in the way that it was at that point, but it was, and I know we all know it, for those that have been teaching a while, it was the bowl of soup on your pelvis.
Yeah.
And so I said, imagine you have a bowl of soup on your pelvis and you don't want it to spill. And he looked at me and he's like, why would I have a bowl of soup on my pelvis?
Why is the soup there?
Why is it there? And I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. And that was kind of my first, like, oh, okay.
Like, oh, that language doesn't work.
The language does not speak to this person. And it was kind of like figuring out, oh, I'm talking to a different, it's like that whole book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It is true. I mean, the brains work different.
Yeah.
And they problem solve different.
Yeah.
And
so different cues work differently. But yeah, that cue is a very common one that's taught. And so that's an example of you like using the cues as
I was a new teacher. Yep.
And you're like, I was taught to use this cue to help somebody.
It worked on everybody.
Yeah. And the goal of that cue is like, what? To like have somebody find the stable pelvis, not to be lifting a hip back and forth.
Exactly. Which now I have better language.
And so it's like that sort of thing. So instead of having like just continuing like, oh, well, why is there soup there? I don't know, just
pretend
there's soup on your. So finding like, okay, well, can you feel equal weight behind both hips?
Exactly.
Or something else that might make more sense.
Or even if you took that same cue and it's like, oh, well, imagine your hips are on a scale. Mm-hmm. And you don't want the scale to dip one way or the other. You got to keep that even scale. A guy might go, okay, I get that.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense because everyone's, I mean, I'm assuming has seen like one of those little weighted scales. And they're like, oh yeah, I don't want to make one side lift more than the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to kind of think about, that like, oh, even if you go into like an older gentleman compared to a younger client.
Yeah.
Male or female.
Generational.
Yeah. It's going to be kind of this other adapting the language.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I actually thought of that recently when I was teaching a younger person, and I said something about like Goldilocks, where I was like talking about like,
Did they not know Goldilocks?
Well, in my mind, it went through my head where I was like, do people know that still?
That was like when I mentioned paper dolls.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, well, I know my client was 80-something years old, so I'm like, I know she knows what a paper doll is, but I don't know, because we were like, oh, they don't do that anymore. Yeah. They don't play with paper dolls anymore. So,
But that's like a perfect example of the generational divide, too, because some references people do not know, whether it's like a younger person's reference or an older person's, they might not understand. They might not connect to them.
No. And it's also this whole different way of looking at life in the world and what they've been through or haven't been through in terms of life as well.
Yeah. And that's
experiences that they can't kind of relate with.
Well, the different experiences changes your lens on life, what you understand.
Or who you are.
And it's really just how we have to use the language and cues that make sense for that person. And a lot of people, I think, especially new teachers, will be like afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing.
Yes.
But really, like, if you pick a cue that the person doesn't resonate with, that they can't connect to,
move on.
And you're like, oh, and like you're saying, like the bowl of soup doesn't make sense. Okay, then you say something about a scale or like how to weight the hips.
You don't sit there and try to explain the soup bowl.
So you just like find different language that makes sense.
And you are figuring out the client, like you don't know the language right off the bat because the client's new to you.
Yeah.
And you're figuring them out, they're figuring you out.
Yeah. And so, and that's the other thing, like how we all speak, like teachers have different ways of speaking. That is like our personality type and things we connect to.
Yeah.
So the client's getting used to how we talk. And like what we've said before, as you and I are talking, we're like, sometimes when our brains are just fried and we say something funny to a client that we've taught for a long time and they know what we mean.
They're like, I know what you mean.
I get it.
You're like, take your elbow to your ear.
I'm like, that's
and
not
I'm like,
what...
that's not, I know what you mean. But yeah, they get to know you, you get to know them.
Yeah.
And understand. And it takes time. And also how we speak to other teachers in our language when we're teaching compared to teaching our clients is going to be different. We're adapting that language for that teacher too.
Yeah, and I think also, so when you're going through a teacher training program and everyone you're working with in the program is very in it and learning and everyone's becoming teachers. So then when you get your first client or you first start teaching other people.
All that information.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people are like, oh, well, but you didn't cue or connect to this. You didn't correct this and this. And you're like, well, you can't do all that at once. These clients don't know everything.
And they don't need to know all that information. But yeah, that's so true. And I think if you think about what we're talking about, we had this kind of conversation with a student the other day who was observing. And when we're talking about cues that your client doesn't need to know everything, or you're kind of getting into the cues for that person, is how a cue can be different for each client, but you're getting the same outcome. Like what we were talking about was this client, I wanted her to know where her head was in relation to her shoulders and kind of have an open chest and kind of feel that, connection. And so I was cueing different things. But the student had been taught keyhole arms of Kathy Grant because she was hyperextending and doing all this to find that same connection. Yeah. So the question was, why didn't you cue the keyhole arms, which was a brilliant question.
Yeah, because she recognized that you were trying to get this client to do what
same
keyhole
thing.
arms
Yes.
is intending for.
Yes.
But for this person, that cue wouldn't.
Yeah, and I never used it, not once. But I was using different things. But it just goes to that wouldn't have spoken to this client, and it wouldn't have made any sense in her body.
Yeah.
For her. I mean, she might have been, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. But it just wouldn't have resonated in the same way.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to realize.
Yeah, that we can pick different verbiage or language depending on the client and the situation, even if we're trying to get to the same outcome
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah, because it's the same, you're getting to the same point on that path, but you're just taking a different path to get there. Which is what's fun about teaching.
Yeah.
Is kind of figuring out how do I speak to this client to get them to that, where we want to go.
Yeah. And like we were talking about just before we hopped on, how I had 2 clients back to back today that were so different.
Just personality different.
What they needed was super different. Like, yeah, just very, very, very different. And so the language I was using for one versus the other was completely different. And like the tone of the session was completely different.
Yeah.
And we were working obviously on completely different things. And so it really depends on who you're teaching and how they are that day.
Because I like what you said about the tone. Because it's like the tone of the session was different because it was going towards that client and adapting to them. So not only was it your cueing was different, but the tone of it was different. Not your tone in your voice, but the tone of the session was different.
The whole session,
The whole session. It's like each session is unique in terms of so much because of you adapting to not only the language and the personality and where they are.
Yeah.
And all of that.
Just whatever's needed. And I remember actually, I used to think when I was a younger teacher, I remember thinking like, oh, like I don't know my teaching style because I remember thinking like, oh, I'm so like a chameleon. Like I would change for everybody. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that that's actually a skill and that for myself, it comes a bit naturally where I just kind of adapt per person. Other people, it might not be as natural. People that are a little bit more kind of like set in like how they are, a little stronger personality types.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it's an important thing to be able to at least recognize, to be able to change for each client.
That might be something to add into like what's important to see in a teacher, like what makes a good teacher. Is that we talked about curiosity in one episode, but that's also true, is that you're able to get on the same ride, I guess, with the client and not stick into your own little lane that you're willing to change to get into.
Yeah. To try to adapt
with them.
It might be a little bit of like some like empathy, you're able to kind of reflect on what they need in real time.
You can see it, you can feel it, you can, but still having the boundaries, so you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother,
whole nother thing. But, I lost my train of thought, totally.
We knew it would happen.
I don't remember what it was. It'll come back.
With the student talking about the keyhole arms, so the client that you were working with, like it would not have worked for her if you had cued that.
No, and there's a couple of reasons why, too. In fact, she didn't hyperextend, so to get her to connect where I wanted her to connect needed to come in a different way in her body and her movement pattern. But what was interesting was the client was there and also has gone through teacher training and was just having her session. So she said, oh, yeah, and she has a wrist issue. And she's like, yeah, I just feel like I would have been all about, what my wrist was doing and kind of connecting. So it kind of would have put her in this kind of position of her arms and moving. And she's like, that just wouldn't have worked in that respect. So that was interesting because I didn't even think of that.
About the wrist.
About the wrist. Yeah. So it's interesting because the person that's feeling it and going through it is connecting in a way that maybe you don't know in terms of. But I think that with the keyhole arms, it's just this whole, it's something that you can teach someone with hyperextension, and then you can use it over and over and over. Mm-hmm. But with this one, we used the neck stretcher last week. And everything we went through, I kept cueing her neck stretcher and this and that. And it just opened her up in a different way.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't collapsing, she wasn't rounding, she wasn't losing where her head was. So that was working for her.
And that's the cue that you were continuing along the session for her instead of the keyhole arms.
Instead of the keyhole arms. Because she knows keyhole arms. Mm-hmm. She's been taught keyhole arms.
But it just wouldn't have connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No.
So it works through the body in a different way.
Yeah. Because I think also if you think about our Pilates and we're helping someone with their movement patterns that are kind of set, is we're adapting to the language to them, to what's going to, like you said, resonate for them in terms of their movement.
Yeah. I mean, just because we all know like certain cues for certain exercises that are like the standard cues, and it's good to know them because you know the purpose of the exercise or what you're trying to look for. I think when a client's new, it's kind of easy because you're kind of figuring them out. You can use these cues and going through it. But then if we keep using those same standard cues for someone as they're deepening into their practice or as we've worked with them longer and longer, we're not personalizing it for them. So that might work for like a group session.
Yep.
Where you just have like 20 people or 5 people or whatever.
Yeah.
And you just have to give cues to give all of these people simultaneously the idea of what you're trying to get across. But when it's with a private, like that, you can start with those scripted cues, but you need to adapt it to the person.
Yeah, to get them to move deeper and more forward.
Yeah, what you're seeing that they need.
Yeah. Oh, and I did remember. Okay, I did remember. So we talked about this before jumping on, and we're talking about adapting language in that moment with our cueing, but also, and this came up in the couple of weeks, as you know, like when a client, and you and I both have had clients that have lost spouses or family members or pets, and then they come back to Pilates, and so in those moments, they've had something traumatic happen in their life, or they're dealing with something traumatic, an illness or whatever. And so again, we're having to adapt our language, adapt our cues for where they are in those moments. And maybe kind of choosing a different route in terms of how do I get this person to move and what is it they actually need in terms of what they hear, in terms of their movement.
Yeah, because they could be in a completely different headspace than normal.
Completely different.
And so you're used to working with this client in a certain way.
And they're in a completely different thought process, emotional. We kind of go into it in our workshop that's coming up in May, not to jump ahead. But when they have all those stressors, they're kind of like on overflow. And so you've got to kind of back off a bit in terms of what you expect.
Yeah.
And what you're telling them needs to happen, or whatever it is, however you want to put it.
Because maybe they just like can't handle a lot of coordination or complicated movements.
Yep.
Maybe they do need a lot of complicated movements to not be thinking about something.
So it's like, where do you go?
Yeah.
Or do they need to breathe, or is that going to like cause, it's like, because that can also...
Yeah, somebody can start panicking if they're doing like 100 breath.
Exactly.
Or some faster pace breathing if they're already on this like heightened
central, yeah.
So that can tip them into that. So it depends on what you're dealing with that day.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that. It's like you can't treat the client the same every time they come in terms of how you're cueing and what you're saying, because they're different every time they come in.
Yeah.
Maybe not that extreme.
Right. But even just a little bit. Like somebody could have been a little bit rushed that day and they're a little more stressed and frazzled.
They didn't sleep or just whatever.
Whatever those stressors are.
Kids were yelling at them.
Yeah. That happens.
No.
But I mean, just because we have certain cues for certain exercises doesn't mean we have to use it, and doesn't mean we have to use it for every person.
Right.
And so it's just, it goes back to teach the person in front of you, that includes like that day, that person, that session.
That moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I loved your client, Barry, today. Can I say her name?
Yeah.
Yeah. We love her. But it was like, she just is like, it's sometimes like you have her, I have Susan, and sometimes these clients, they need to not be like drilled. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, they have to have moments of, you know, just letting things out or whatever.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to do that as well. You're not like letting them just like goof off.
Yeah.
But, you know, when she sat up and wanted to tell about the pretzels she ate.
Yeah.
It was so cute. I loved it.
Yeah. And I just like, she was telling me a bunch of different stories today. And, you know, as she's talking, I'll have her keep moving just to get a little bit of whatever. And then in between, like, okay, and I can see when she can focus a little bit more.
Yep.
So then we'll get some things in, a little more focus. And then she starts telling a story again. So, okay, and then we'll go back into that. So kind of guide it as you need, guide it as you can see what they're able to do. And I think it really, it doesn't have any reflection on us as the teacher.
No.
If somebody's able to or not able to do something, or if they're able to or not able to connect to something, it's not about us. You speak to them how it might help.
Yep.
But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you pick different language. You adapt what you need to do.
And I think it's so funny. I have a funny story on that. So like you have Barry, I have Susan, and they're both around the same age. And so, you know, Susan will stop and want to chat and do it. And then I'm like, okay, get back focused. But then I had a client who wasn't older. He was younger. He was a doctor. And I wouldn't let him talk because he was goofing off. Like he didn't want to do the work. So he would start, oh, did you watch Downton Abbey last week? And I'd be like, stop moving because I'm not going to let you move if you're talking. And then it was like we were walking across the studio one day and there was a teacher there just chit-chatting with her client. And he's like, you don't let me do that. And I'm like, nope. But because I knew it was like, for him, it was a way to goof off.
Yeah.
And not do the work.
So he couldn't.
So he was killing time.
Yeah.
Going, did you watch Downton Abbey? Or, you know, I was with a patient. I'm like, Dr. Ben? No. So it's kind of like learning their little moments too, where it's like, oh, now you're just trying to work me.
Yeah. And
we need to work. So I would say that. I was like, he'd start talking, so I stop moving. Because we're not going to go any further if you're talking, because that's all it was. But yeah, it's like learning their personality and what they actually need, because he did need to work. He just was lazy. But he was a golfer and a plastic surgeon, so he needed to, like, he had things he had to work on.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. You know, so it's...
He used those keyhole arms.
Yeah. We did a lot of those, yeah. But it's real. I find it really interesting kind of learning about the client and then learning how to talk to the client and get them to connect in ways that are unique to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of, that's what's so interesting about teaching Pilates. It's like a little bit of psychology along with a little bit of, you know, physical rehabilitation plus exercise plus, you know, there's so much in there that we are providing people. Some companionship, some regularity, like having a schedule, a session every week, and you know, there's just so much routine there.
And I think that's really important. Also to remember is like sometimes maybe they're coming, but they're not really here or in it because of what's going on. But it is something they can count on and know. Okay, I can go there. I can be safe. I'll be supported. I'll do what I need to do. I'll feel better.
Yeah.
And then we're just adapting to that day.
That
happens a lot. Yeah. That happens a lot.
A lot.
But any closing thoughts on that one? Because I feel like, I mean, there's so much with cueing, and we've had so many different episodes on different aspects of it.
I think the main thing is that it really, like, people are always looking for, like, this magic cue, and, like, people are taking all these cueing workshops to be able to be, like, the best cuer in the industry, and it's really not about that. It's just about what this person needs, and cueing just is a conversation. So you're going back and forth, and you're finding ways to express to this client how to find the right movement in this exercise and to find what they need. So it's not this like secret language. There's not a magic cue. There's not like amazing, like perfected cues.
There's not a little handbook that these are the cues. You'll like this one. I had a client once on pulling straps, and her arms weren't engaging. I said, imagine, I say this a lot, imagine you're digging a trench. She's like, I don't want to dig a trench. She's like, what if I was like pulling back and there were cakes down there and I was going through the icing? I'm like, that works.
That works.
So that's what she did. I'm like, okay, imagine those cakes and you're pushing down into the icing and going through. But it was like just finding that. And she was like, no, that doesn't work for me. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's certain cues that I've taken classes and certain ones where I'm like, ooh, I like that. That really works for me. And then I use it for a client
and does not connect.
And there's other ones where I'm like, oh, I really don't like that. But then I'm trying to get a client to do something, and I'm like, you know what? You try that one that you didn't think you liked,
maybe
and
it will.
It worked.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I think that's it. You've just got to, like you said in the beginning, it's like it might work for one, might not work for another. Mm-hmm. And there's just no same cue for everything.
Yeah. And our teaching a session is not a performance. So if you get a cue wrong, it doesn't matter. You just pick something else, adapt it, see what will connect for the person. And then when you see what you're asking for, it's like, yes, you got it.
Yay.
Yeah.
Oh, that was good. Oh, we should talk. What? When does this come out? Oh, yes, we can.
Well, we have, this is coming out just in a couple days.
Yeah.
And we have a workshop coming up in just a couple weeks.
May 17th?
17th.
Yes. So it's here in LA or
virtual.
And we'll also have the recording for those that can't make it live. And it's all on our website, PilatesChicks.com, under upcoming events.
You can also DM us on Instagram, and we can send you the link.
Yep, and book your spot. We're trying to keep it kind of small in the studio.
Yeah, we'll just have a few people in the studio, and then virtually is open.
Yeah, and of course recording, definitely open. And there's 4 CECs.
Yep.
It's guiding clients in pain. Did we say that?
That we did not say yet.
guiding clients in pain, which kind of is the same in terms of cueing.
Very much.
Very much important with very much important. Is that a sentence?
Very much important. Because your cueing very much does change depending on pain threshold, level of pain, chronic pain, past injury, kinesiophobia.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
But it's going to be fun. We're excited about it.
Yeah.
And that's about it. Check us out on Instagram. What else? Anywhere. There's social media.
Anywhere.
As you can tell, our brains are like, what day is it?
Who knows?
But thanks for listening, and we'll see you or hear you, or you'll hear us next time.
You'll hear us?
Bye.
Bye.